Hello and welcome to the first race at the dawn of a new era for professional bike racing. It's race one in the digital Swiss 5 featuring the best teams in world cycling. And for the first day, the riders will be riding familiar Swiss roads in a virtual setting. The first of 5 days takes the riders on a 26.62 kilometre mountain assault from Agar to Leukerbad. It's a tough climbing challenge using real-life video on the Ruby platform with the work performed and recorded on sophisticated home trainers. 2 tough climbs along the way. And over 1,000 metres of climbing. It's a tough first day challenge. Well, accompany us today on the Ruby AR app to get the best understanding of DS5 racing. Here's how it works. To get the best experience out of watching a race on the Ruby platform, download the Ruby AR application to a laptop or smart device and choose the race tab to find the next digital Swiss 5 race. It's free to download and free to watch each race. Pick the best video resolution, then select the start list for the event, scroll through the list to see who's riding and their key data, and choose your favourite rider or up to follow the leader as the race unfolds. The menu offers display of the order of the riders through the various split points in the race. Select the riders while the race is underway, and the key data will help give you the best possible understanding in the world's most exciting online bike racing. We've got 19 of the world's top squads in action this week, including the AG Tour team of local hero Matthias Frank, Bora Hansgrohe featuring emerging German star Leonard Kemna, and Simon Geschke's CCC squad. Young Belgian sensation Remco Evenepoel starts, and he'll be one to watch. For his Deceuninck Quickstep sports director Tom Stales, this is an exciting innovation.
Yeah, it's a good concept. I mean, in this period, I think it's a challenge for every rider to do a race like that. It's not so easy. It's very hard, to be honest. But it gives them a goal. It gives them something to look forward to. And it's at the end, it's still racing. I mean, it's not, of course, like a normal road race. It's a big fight against themselves and also against the competitors, of course. But it's a good way. It's fun to watch and also to do. I must say, the riders are quite nervous to do it.
Matteo Badilati and Reto Hollenstein are 2 Swiss riders on duty for Israel's startup nation. Sander Arme is there for Lotto Soudal, and Damien Howson is a strong climber with Mitchelton Scott. Movistar bring veteran Vuelta stage winner Imanol Erviti in for day one, while Louis Menkes will be one to watch for NTT Pro Cycling, along with Wout Poels at Bahrain McLaren. Rowan Dennis and George Bennett will surely feature for Team Ineos and Team Jumbo-Visma respectively, while Sunweb's Nico Roach is very eager to go racing.
Already when I read about it a couple of weeks ago, I was like, I hope the team asked me to do it. I keep and when they asked me to do it a couple of weeks, last week, I was like, oh yes, as many as you want. How many days can I do? So I was quite excited. You know, I mean, even for the fun, during the week, I do some of those online races. I don't know. I just can't live without the competitive edge.
Bauke Mollema is on duty for Trek Segafredo. Gavin Mannion will hope he's brought his climbing legs for rally cycling, and Lilian Calmjean may well fancy an attack for Total Direct Energy. Finally, the Swiss national squad have called up Fabian Lienhardt from Groupama FDJ for this short and very intense introduction to the digital Swiss 5. Well, just under a minute left to the start of the first of these digital Swiss 5 races, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that I'm joined by former world hour record holder and Giro d'Italia stage winner Alex Dowsett, who's going to accompany me through the 5 days of great racing action. And Alex, it's a mouth-watering prospect, fantastic selection of riders, great team selection, and a really interesting day.
Yeah, it's going to be very different, I think, to what we're used to, and it'll be quite something to see it unfold. This is a new step forwards for professional cycling.
Yes, it's the new normal. It's the new reality, and all the riders are on their home trainers, absolutely flat chat. Their avatars are waiting at the start line. Within the next 13 seconds, you're going to see the riders launched clear, and we've got 57 of the top World Tour professionals, world professionals indeed, down to the final 5 seconds, and they are going to launch clear with Great abandon, I can tell you. It's an absolutely flat chat. Problems for Matthias Frank. Is that perhaps a virtual mechanical of some sort for the Swiss veteran who will be hoping to come up with a decent result? He was left standing, or at least his avatar was, at any rate, at the beginning, as James Whelan gets underway with a super effort, and the man they call Jimmy Half Whelan was in flying form. They had a test race yesterday, and the victory, I can tell you, was something of a private battle between the teams. It was Jimmy Whelan that came up with the victory. Robert Hessing showing well in the early stages, a man who's gone well in the Tour de Suisse in the past, and we are on Tour de Suisse, familiar Tour de Suisse roads, heading towards Leukerbad. It's a familiar finishing venue, destination indeed, for Tour de Suisse competitors. 3 times in the past we've gone to there, and there you have the avatar of Matthias Frank showing is struggling, stuck at the start line. Not sure whether he's perhaps had some sort of a Wi-Fi dropout. Another man who has a little bit of work to do to get into the groove, and up with them is Simon Geschke, the German veteran, superb climber on his day. And as they race across these virtual roads, the familiar roads indeed to many riders in this part of the world, Geschke needs to find a bit to get on terms. And of course, Alex, it's probably worth pointing out at this moment that they don't have the draft effect, and that's significant. It is a pure athletic effort. The tactics are going to be very different to familiar road racing.
Oh, very much so. I think this is, we're going to see some riders going up the blocks very hard and then paying for it later. Pacing, I think, is going to be everything. And my teammate Alexis Renard's gone out very hard on the flat, and this kind of power output, you wouldn't normally see a gap opening up, but as there is no drafting, the riders are already all spread out, and it's going to be very new for each of these riders to. I think they'll look back afterwards and be thinking, I should have done that differently. Matthias Frank may well just be thinking, I should have double-checked my Wi-Fi connection, perhaps.
Well, there you have the picture of
the new puncher.
Somewhat frustrated Swiss rider Matthias Frank, who's clearly had some sort of an issue with his Wi-Fi. He's been left standing. Unfortunately, he's not going to be able to challenge, but there are more opportunities later in the day. Alexei Reynard from Alex's Israel Startup Nation squad is in flying form. He's one of the youngest riders in the group, and he's certainly an early adopter. And if the younger riders have some sort of an advantage, well, he's a young Frenchman of some developing ability. He's going well in the early stages, as indeed is Jimmy Whelan, and how well he is adapted. He's the man up front at the moment. Luke Durbridge, it's an Aussie 1-2 in the early stages. EF Education first from Mitchelton Scott. Whelan has an advantage of 15 metres in the early stages. However, it's a long way to go. It's a sprint in road racing terms at just 22.62 kilometers of racing today, Alex, but it's extremely grippy, and these climbs are quite the sufferfest, aren't they, on a home trainer?
Oh yes, this isn't going to feel like a short stay for these guys, that's for sure. It's going to, I mean, you can see in the images the climb that they're about to go up, zigzagging up the mountain. The smart trainers, they'll be on the resistances, will really ramp up, sort of akin to the resistance of an incline on the road, and things are going to get quite grippy, and they'll be watching the kilometres count down very, very slowly.
Yeah, already the group of 57 riders make that 56 that are still in contention and still involved in the race. They have strung out considerably with Luke Durbridge and Jimmy Whelan. Aussie forming a little bit of an Aussie packed up front. It's a bit of a 2-up time trial for those riders at the moment as they put out significant watts per kilogram. Luke Durbridge, who has a big old engine on him, and himself and Whelan are putting around about 5.2 up to 6.4 watts per kilo between them. Durbridge, they're slightly the heavier of the two, and he's going to make hay while the sun shines as he approaches the climb, wants to see if he can get some sort of an advantage. You get the picture of the effort that James Whelan is having to make to stay on terms with Luke Durbridge, but it's effective, isn't it? Because they've got, over 70 metres advantage over Eduardo Affini, the next best rest of the riders. Sitting third in line for Mitchelton Scott. So Mitchelton Scott 1-3 at the moment with Durbridge and Affini packing nicely for the Australian squad. Scrolling down through the top 10, Alexei Reynar is after his great start for Israel's Start of Nations in good form. Nicholas Roach, who we heard from at the top of the show from Team Sunweb, is clearly up for this one. He's 137 metres behind the leaders in the early stages as the rest of the riders scroll through. Let's pick up some other names. Rowan Dennis, Alexei Reynar, Brento Hollenstein, Peter Seri, Lawson Craddock, and the rest as they are clearly making big efforts in the early stages. And well, it's all about measuring your effort. We've mentioned, Alex, the fact that we've got two big climbs. The first of them is the more challenging. We saw it yesterday in the test race, and it is a very, very tough assault indeed.
Yeah, they're going to be on this climb for a while. This is where Jimmy yesterday really pulled out his advantage. We've seen he's gone out really hard early on with Luke there. He's already riding well above sort of 6.5 into 7.5 watts per kilo. I mean, there's the numbers. Yesterday we saw him generally between 5.5 and 6.5 for the duration of the race. I don't know if yesterday's given him a bit of overconfidence here. We will see later on. And some of the other guys that were racing were definitely saving some pennies, because this kind of effort, even though it's only an hour, it takes them getting over. So I wonder if Jimmy will already be feeling it.
Well, already we're starting to see a little bit of a change between the two, as Durbridge was absolutely flying on the flat road, as well you might expect from a time trial specialist, but he's having to make huge efforts now to stay on turn. 7 watts per kilo his avatar is showing, as he struggles to stay on terms with Whelan, who's putting out similar comparable effort, but of course he's got a slightly lighter frame, and that's to his advantage. So it's going to come back to the lighter riders. According to our official notes, it's 65 kilograms is James, sorry, 66.2 is James Whelan. And by way of contrast, Luke Durbridge showing at 82 kilograms, and indeed I do believe that Luke Durbridge is, well, far from heavy, probably the heaviest rider in this group. So 1, 2, 3, 4 at the moment for the Aussie riders. Look at that.
Yeah. I've got Luke's numbers up in front of me at the moment, and he's just sitting. There's not much underneath 500 watts currently, and Luke's a very, very powerful rider. But that sort of wattage for we're looking at an hour of racing here. That sort of wattage for an hour, that's gonna bite at some point for him. That's for sure. I think it's a really interesting point to look at. The Ruby platform is how the algorithms work. This is online racing. It's different. It's very different to the real world racing. I think to try and compare them would be tough. We've got downhills here, and on downhills in racing, say in Switzerland, you would be slowing down for corners, accelerating. Whereas here, it's like, how does the platform benefit, or if you were to ride at 7 watts per kilo going down a descent, you're going to be doing 120 kilometers an hour, or if you sit at 0, how much time are you going to lose? It's going to be interesting to see how the riders judge that on the descents, and I think throughout this series, how the riders learn how best to maximize their effort to produce the best time on this course, because ultimately, whilst they're racing other riders on the course, they're also racing themselves and trying to get the best time. Because there's no drafting, trying to get the best time over the whole course.
It's like the dawn of a new era. It's like the early days of road racing, kind of compared to the way that everybody was learning the tactics. It's almost a similar situation. A lot of these riders will know their bodies, they'll know their own physique, but how do you play the game? And it will be fascinating to see how the descents play into this. They're often an opportunity to take a bit of a rest while you work on, you simply can't carry the kind of speeds through the corners that is possible on this game, where the cornering is all done for you. Are they going to have to push on the descents? We'll watch out for that. And the
spezielle Situationen haben manchmal auch ihr Gutes, zum Beispiel, dass man dem Fahrer direkt im Studio ein, zwei Fragen stellen kann, sofern das geht.
Mickey Scher in the studio, pressing on and sitting. Well, last time we saw he was in about 18th position. He's a fairly big unit himself, generates some pretty big watts, and he's managing to have a couple. I wonder how that's going to affect his effort. He's sitting in just behind Sander Arme, just ahead of Nons Peters, and at a remove of just around about 285 meters to the leaders at the moment.
I think seeing where Durbridge ends up at the end of the day is going to be very interesting. That's something I'll be looking out for, is actually where Durbo ends up. Just given the sheer effort he's putting out now, we're still seeing high 400s, low 500s. He's putting an enormous effort in right now, and we are still, we're not even a quarter of the way into this race.
A fair bit of your own career, haven't you, racing with and against Luke Durbridge, and similar characteristics, similar physical abilities, and it's been an immense effort indeed from Luke Durbridge. Still a 1-2-3-4 for the Aussie riders. James Whelan with that advantage, holding steady at 70 odd meters on Luke Durbridge, sitting second. DF Education first, ahead of Mitchelton Scott. Team Ineos have moved up into third place. One of the most interesting competitors in the event, Cameron Worth, who's resumed his cycling career this year. Don't think he expected it all to be online, but he's sitting in third place, ahead of his teammate and fellow Aussie and world time trial champion Rowan Dennis, and the first four covered by 100 meters. Let's pick up the images of Rowan Dennis, double world time trial champion, a man who loves Switzerland, second overall in the Tour de Suisse 12 months ago in 2019, and he's won several stages of Tour de Suisse in the past as well. Well, no man knows how to pace his effort and time it to perfection as well as Rowan Dennis.
Yeah, Rowan's he's really a man to watch here. Although, I think with the climbing, again going back to the algorithm, is how important power to weight is on the climbs. You'd assume on the flat that the algorithm would lean more towards just raw power and maybe height, if the riders had to input this. Power against height, because that's the basic sort of aerodynamic value. But then if we look at on the climb, you're looking more towards power to weight, and then that's more significant the steeper the climb gets. So if it's a 1% drag, then outright power should be more significant than it is on the steeper slopes, and a smart rider will measure his effort accordingly. Because Matthias Frank that is a man who is not racing currently.
Yes, 56 riders still in contention and still riding out there. Antonio Nibali is the final competitor. He's almost a kilometre down. He's 815 meters last time we heard, but Matthias Frank, 57th rider in the field, and unfortunately didn't get out of the starting block, so disappointment for him. But the leaders up front, still the four Aussies, absolutely flying, covered by just over 100 meters. Rowan Dennis playing himself into this one nicely. I can tell you he's going slightly quicker over the virtual tarmac than James Whelan. It's all changing pretty quickly, but it's around about 17 kilometers an hour. They're managing to get up a gradient that is, well, to say the least, demanding. 8% is and this is a very, very accurate representation. The effort that the riders are putting into the pedals, not too dissimilar to the effort that's required when they get to the climb proper. Nicholas Roach is the first non-Aussie in the race at the moment, sitting fifth, 180 meters back. Bit to find to get to Cam Worth, who's been overtaken now by Rowan Dennis. Dennis up into third place, ahead of Cameron Worth, the former triathlete. Before that, of course, he was a World Tour cyclist. Before that, he was a rower of some ability, so he certainly likes to move things around a little bit. As we pick up the images of Reto Hollenstein, another Swiss favourite, on his home trainer, pushing on in 17th position, just behind his compatriot and indeed teammate Matteo Badilati, and ahead of a man we'll be watching out for, Wout Poels, sitting in 17th position and 18th position at the moment.
Yeah, Wout yesterday in the test ride, he really paced himself well. We saw him, he was the rider going forwards in the biggest way in the second half of the event. Seeing Nicholas Roach up there as well yesterday definitely saved some pennies for today. He was well outside the top 20 yesterday, and with the interview we saw earlier, he's very very motivated for this. He's clearly a man that loves his racing, any form of racing. So he's saying he's taken to this this platform, and he's enjoying the prospect of just getting some competitive juices flowing, I guess.
Certainly is. He's a man who's super isolated down in Monaco. He's very much on his own, so any opportunity to get the competitive juices flowing, as you say, is welcome and well received. Now, Nicholas Roach could well be dropping into the clutches of, despite the fact that he's moved up and ahead of Cameron Murph. Great effort from Nico Roach. He's finally got in amongst the Aussies. Looks like a man that we're very interested to see the progress of. Remco Evenepoel is starting to make something of a charge. 6.4 watts per kilo from the 20-year-old Belgian tyro. He's absolutely flying at the moment, sitting in 7th position. And this man, who hasn't been beaten in a stage race this year, it's a remarkable start to the season. His victories in the Vuelta San Juan, and of course in Portugal, in Volta Algarve, before the lockdown began. While Remco Evenepoel just chomping at the bit, really, to see what he's capable of doing. But he's got to find 200 meters to get on terms with still the runaway leader, James Whelan, who's extended his advantage now over Rowan Dennis, up just over 88 meters. Robert Hessing on the home trainer. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Part of Remco's, I think, real talent lies in the position he's able to get himself into on the bike. Just how low he is, how compact and powerful he is. You know, he's light and he's powerful, but he's also, you know, his frontal profile is tiny, and that's something that doesn't play to his advantage here. Obviously, with aerodynamics not being a factor in any way, shape or form. Yeah, I wonder if any of the riders, on the back of that, I wonder if any of the riders actually sort of raised their handlebars, you know, adjusted their saddle just to provide a position that's more suitable for simply putting out sheer power, rather than a position that, you know, factors in aero as well. You know, there's no reason to be on the drops. There's no reason to be crouched down on the bars. You don't even have to be covering any brakes. Obviously, it's you know, it makes for how it depends how seriously the riders really have taken this to this, is how much they're looking into, I guess you could call it, the marginal gains of online racing.
Yeah, you're already thinking in those terms, aren't you, Alex? And I'm quite sure you're not the only one. I'm quite sure we're going to see machines evolve, and while right now they are very much just bicycles with the back wheel removed and mounted to what they call direct drive turbo trainers, that's going to change, and you can see different saddles appearing, different top tube lengths, different heights for the handlebars, and all sorts of extra sort of accoutrements to allow you to get to the towel quick, get the proper and the ideal view, get the fan into you as well, get as much air, cool air blowing towards you, and well, it's no problem at the moment for James Whelan. His advantage is extending. Still going in the right direction for Jimmy Whelan. He's absolutely flying. 23-year-old Australian, man from Melbourne. Been with the EF Pro Cycling squad since the beginning of last year. Moved up from the feeder team, the Drapac AF cycling team, and he's going well. Second in the Oceania Continental Championships road races, standout performance in what's still a fledgling career. He also won Ronde van Vlaanderen Beloften in 2018, a race for emerging professional riders, and James Whelan has carried that talent and that ability, and indeed lots of knowledge of online bike racing, very much an early adopter, and he's making the most of that knowledge, that ability, and extending, well, I was saying he was extending his lead over Rowan Dennis, but as I check out the app, looks as if he's just lost about 10 meters there. Maybe the gradient gripped a little bit for him, and Rowan Dennis just had a little bit of an advantage. But Whelan is, well, he's crawling all over the bike at the moment. There's just no let up. You've got to keep pedaling. There's no opportunity to freewheel anywhere on this hill.
No, and when we are looking at the distances, that is subjective to the gradient that the rider's on. So when Jimmy Whelan crests the first climb and starts the downhill, that gap to Rowan and everyone else is really going to increase, and it's going to go up to a couple of 100 meters. But then as soon as Jimmy hits the, this is presuming that he's still leading, as soon as Jimmy hits the next climb, that gap in distance is going to come down massively. So they have to take those distances right now with a pinch of salt. But for sure, if Rowan can see Jimmy up the road, that's a nice carrot to be chasing. But I'm sure with Rowan being the time trialist he is the current world champion, he will be perhaps just looking at his own effort rather than getting embroiled into the efforts of the others.
Yeah, the gap's coming down. Rowan Dennis will have, you would imagine, have an advantage when they hit the descent off the top of this hill. Little way to go before they hit that one, not too far at any rate. Nicholas Roach, I can tell you, is up into third place. The Irishman who finished in that position in the lockdown Ronde van Vlaanderen not so long ago has got about 155 metres to make up if he's to get to the leader, James Whelan. So he's shrinking his disadvantage at the moment. It's going in the right direction. He's managed to overhaul Luke Durbridge. Remco Evenepoel is another man on a charge, up to 5th now, ahead of Chris Hamilton from Team Sunweb. 2 Team Sunweb riders in the top 6. Cam Wurf has slipped away a little bit, the 36-year-old ex-triathlete, ex-World Tour cyclist, ex-rower, current World Tour cyclist with Team Ineos. He's much travelled, but he's going backwards at the moment because he's just been overtaken by Ben O'Connor. Plenty of Aussies, I tell you, in the top 8 at the moment. We've got 6 by my current reckoning of the top 8 are from Australia. So don't know what it is about online racing suiting Australians, but it's certainly to their favour at the moment as we pick up the sight of some of the riders. Wilco Kelderman, the Dutchman from Team Sunweb, bit of time to make up to get on terms with his teammates, currently running in 26th position just behind Gianluca Brambilla. Gino Mader, the Swiss rider with the NTT Pro Cycling squad, also pushing on, and Eduardo Affini for the Mitchelton Scott squad has some ground to make up.
Yeah, Eduardo, he's a super strong time trialist, quite young. I've been describing him as the new Adriano Malori. Absolute powerhouse. He won the time trial stage of the Tour of Britain last year. I think he was third in a very close European Championships. I know it was very close because I was on the wrong end of the close finish. I think Eduardo, Stefan Kung and myself were separated by 0.48 seconds in a battle for the bronze medal. But yeah, he's again riding. He's having to put out some enormous power output to sustain the ride. Watts per kilo needed to remain on track with some of the smaller climbers. I think the flat stage for me is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out with the likes of Jimmy Whelan, who has Rowan Dennis for company right now. There's only 6 metres between them.
Race 2 is a fairly flat one, Frauenfeld to Frauenfeld. It's a circuit race over 46 kilometres, 4 laps of an 11.5 kilometre circuit around the town. We watched that, of course, that town is a host town for the Tour de Suisse in 2021 now, as it was intended to be in 2020. And of course, these roads familiar to many people and many competitors and teams and spectators of Tour de Suisse over the years. We're in the Canton of Valais. It's the German-speaking region of Switzerland, or a German-speaking canton down in southern Switzerland in the Valaisan Alps, heading towards Leukerbad, the largest thermal baths in Switzerland. They've been taking the waters in that part of the world since Roman times. And we're at the foot of the Remy Pass, which is familiar to hikers the world over. Very popular destination for people from Switzerland and further removed. Damien Howson just in front of Eduardo Affini. Howson, useful climber himself and a teammate indeed of Affini, the Michelin Scott riders. They hit a little bit of rough surface.
We've seen a change of lead. Rowan Dennis is now in the lead.
Oh, that's it. Well spotted. It's that's been coming, hasn't it? Rowan Dennis timing his effort to absolute perfection, and he is a rider who, better than anyone else in the world, knows how to get super specific about his efforts. Given the time, he can, and that's what we saw last year in the World Championships. He had a rather controversial departure from his former team, but the silver lining for him was that he had some time and space to prepare on his own and really get himself into perfect and prime position to take that world title in Yorkshire. His second world title, of course, and similarly, he's absolutely perfectly honed, it would appear, for online racing. As we pick up the images of Jimmy Whelan out of the saddle, and out of the saddle it's not so easy on these trainers, is it?
No, the bike doesn't move. Starting to see a few products in the pipeline which where you put your bike and your trainer on effectively a wobble board that will enable your bike to move underneath you, and also when you are out the saddle, you steer into the sort of lean a little bit, so it enables your front wheel to turn as well. So but yeah, that'll be quite uncomfortable for Jimmy. And also wearing a hat. I mean, part of online training, now I've done a bit of online racing, and the thing that keeps cropping up is how important a fan is to keep you cool. Some have said it can help up to 20 watts. It can make a 20-watt difference if you start overheating. So I mean, I don't know if EF have asked him to wear a hat for extra branding, but if that was me, and fortunately it is not me because I'm sat in my very makeshift commentary box instead of on a trainer doing this race. So I think I've got the nicest seat in the house. I wouldn't be wearing a hat.
It's the social distancing broadcast of the year as Chris Hamilton starts to make a little bit of inroads. Nicholas Roach is absolutely flying as well, although quick update of his distance. I think he's about 140, 150 metres behind James Whelan at the moment, hanging on to third place, just in front of Luke Durbridge, or say just in front. He's about 120 metres ahead of him. Meanwhile, Remco Evenepoel, after his early inroads made, hasn't managed to overhaul Luke Durbridge just yet, and they're coming close to the top of this first climb of the day. Then they plunge down the descent, and there's a sort of a shorter but still fairly demanding climb. And then after that, again, another descent, followed by a short, sharp little shock that brings them up to the finish line at Leukerbad at the conclusion of just over 26 kilometres. So Durbridge has been passed now by Remco Evenepoel, has moved up and into fourth position. Next in sight for the 20-year-old tyro that is Remco Evenepoel is Nicholas Roach. Got to make up over 100 metres to get back on terms. Meanwhile, Rowan Dennis, his advantage has now extended up, approaching 100 metres over James Whelan. And Nicholas Roach is within 100 metres of Whelan. So Roach with a decent shot of getting up into second place, but will Evenepoel have got to him before that happens, as we pick up the sights of Mickey Scher a little bit further down the line, but still doing a pretty impressive effort for a number of reasons. There's studio lights there, they're talking to him, he's managing to find some conversation, still managing to get the watts out and stay towards the pointy end of affairs in 13th position.
Remco's lifted his tempo. We're not seeing anything below 6 watts per kilo for quite a while. He was sat on 6.7, 6.8. He's measuring his effort differently to Rowan here, obviously differently to Jimmy Whelan as well. Luke Durbridge still hanging on, considering how hard he was going early on. To be sat at 500 watts for 10 minutes like he was early on, he's now he's still sitting at a solid 5.5 watts per kilo, which is, for a guy his size, that's still some big numbers. Just looking at it now, up on there, focusing on his data, he's still sitting at 440, 450, 460 watts. That's massive.
Yeah, the huge numbers, and they're painful numbers, so you can be left in no doubt whatsoever that while it all looks very smooth and controlled in the animated avatar, what's going into the pedals on those home trainers is absolute sheer savagery. And you do get a sense, don't you, when you're looking at James Whelan there, that his shoulders are rocking. It's a massive effort being made as Chris Hamilton gets on terms now with Luke Durbridge, about to overhaul his fellow countryman, make it 2 Team Sunweb riders in the top 5, pressing on regardless and doing a pretty impressive job. Dennis still continues to lead. His advantage now over Whelan is heading up towards 300 metres, so it's still going north for the for the double world time trial champion. And Rowan Dennis has clearly benefited from this lockdown situation in terms of maintaining his fitness. We should, I suppose, comment on the fact, Alex, that not every rider has absolutely perfect conditions to maintain their fitness. We've got riders out there that are at altitude, and maybe they've made decisions on throttling back a little bit on their fitness in order to go again and find later peaks in the season when it does resume out on the road.
For sure. I mean, that was the first thing that I myself did when we knew that sort of A, wouldn't be able to get out and ride outside, and B, any targets that we had been pushed back months. It was right, let's take the mid-season break now, because we could be looking at a very long 2021 season if we're finishing racing late November and the 2021 season hasn't changed. That's basically just December with no racing. So I think I was thinking, right, I can afford to back off a little bit and then ramp it up again, and knowing that I'm mentally fresh enough to continue all the way through to October 2021. It's going to be a long stint, but it's necessary. I can see this. So back to the race. This is interesting. Rowan's descending, still at huge power. He's not let up at all. And it's, I think, if the other riders are watching Rowan, and we're hoping to get some kind of rest on the descent, he's just made sure that no one's going to get that. We could even say there's some mind games being thrown into this.
Well, let's talk about mind games. Let's talk about the sporting directors and what sort of influence they can have over affairs, what sort of tactics they'll think about adopting. With just 3 riders to choose from, how do you apportion your resources, and what do you say to your riders? Is there a chance for one rider to do something to the benefit of another rider?
I don't think there is in this. And only maybe getting, like with Durbridge going as hard as he did early on, doing that to try and force the hand of some other riders to keep up out of panic. And then to have, say, your second rider or your third rider or your team leader just riding their own pace in the hope that others are going to blow up in the second half of the climb, having chased them. It's I think tactically that's kind of the only thing for me that you can implement here, because of the lack of drafting. You can see Rowan's now knocked it back to just 4 watts per kilo. Maybe his team at the speed isn't massively affected by how much power he's doing. All of these riders on screen, they're all working hard. There's a few towels, there's a few Remco's still getting very aero. It's Mickey Shah's in the drops. That's aerodynamically, Mickey, that's not going to help you for now, but I can understand if it's for comfort. It's very easy for me to say sat here, obviously.
Yeah, I suppose it just comes naturally to him. He spends all day, every day on the drops, grinding away on the front of bunches, and he's made quite the career of it indeed, has Mickey Share. Nicholas Roach still sitting in 3rd place at the moment now, just over 500 metres behind. Whelan starting to close up a little bit on Rowan Dennis as the gradient starts to grip again for the race leader, but it was instructive that James Whelan took the opportunity, as we saw from his camera, to take a gel over the top of the climb, and his watts per kilo dropped to just over 1 for a moment, just over 1 watt per kilo, while Rowan Dennis, while not going absolutely at his maximum intensity, was still putting a fair bit of effort into the pedals and drawing out clear of the rest. But he's now on that climb. He's hit the gradient again. 12-13% efforts at the moment for Rowan Dennis. 11-12. It's grippy, it's hard, it's really tough just to get the pedals around. And James Whelan still benefiting. Well, just as I say it, he's starting to hit the early slopes of this second climb of the day. And having shrunk the advantage down to less than 200 meters, that will start to extend again as the concertina effect takes effect, and to the advantage of your race leader. Rowan Dennis absolutely flying out front. James Whelan, his fellow countryman, from EF Education First, sitting in second position. Nicholas Roach still sitting third for Team Sunweb, now just over 200 metres behind, but within, well, about 228 metres to find to get on terms with Whelan. Luke Durbridge in fourth position at the moment for Mitchelton Scott. It's been a super effort indeed, hasn't it, been from Durbridge, who, despite his you know, he wouldn't have a reputation as a climber. He's getting over these hills extremely well in virtual setting. Chris Hamilton sitting in fifth at the moment for Team Sunweb. Remco Evenepoel has slipped back from his position. He's now down in sixth, and indeed going backwards a little bit. Is there a problem, I wonder, for Remco Evenepoel? Because he's been overhauled now by Ben O'Connor. Cam Worf is sitting back in eighth position, just behind Evenepoel. Peter Seri is the second of the Corning Quick-Step riders in ninth, and Lawson Craddock the outer reaches of the top 10 for EF Education First, fully 800 metres behind the lead at the moment.
I think we have to look at this, yeah, the results here. We could see some surprises. A mountainous stage of any race in Switzerland, for example, is Rowan Dennis going to win when the likes of Remco and Ben O'Connor, you know, some Pello Bilbao, some real Seb Kuss, George Bennett, some real sort of specialist climbers are there. That's not a result we'd expect to see, but then this isn't, going back to what we were saying earlier, it would be, I think, unwise to try and compare this to a real world race. I mean, obviously this is a real race, but to compare it to an actual stage of the Tour de Suisse or Tour de Romandie, for example, you know, it's an online platform. It's virtual reality racing. It's not gaming as such, but and I think this form of racing is closer to real cycling than
Ja, wir befinden uns hier direkt an der Strecke, und zwar an einem neuralgischen Punkt.
I'll pick that up in a minute.
Yeah, Rowan Dennis still hanging on to the lead, 214 metres ahead of James Whelan, who won the test event yesterday, but he's got a bit of work to do to get back on term. Still hanging on to that second position. He's in a bit of a scrap now with Nicholas Roach for second in line. Roach third, Durbridge sitting fourth, Hamilton next up for Team Sunweb, just under 500 metres behind. Ben O'Connor, Remco Evenepoel, Cam Worf, Peter Seri, Lawson Craddock, Nicky Scher and the rest. Some of the bigger names further down the line. Double Giro d'Italia stage winner Pello Bilbao sitting back in 14th position, just over a kilometre behind. The young emerging Hungarian Attila Valters in 15th, so good effort from him. Robert Hessing, Team Jumbo Visma, a man who's sitting at altitude. He's done well in Tour de Suisse in the past. Indeed, he's been fifth on these roads into Leukerbad a couple of years ago. He's fifth on the stage. Sorry, I should say fourth on the stage in 2018. Wilco Kelderman, another man from Team Sunweb, who's familiar with these roads, sitting in 21st as things currently stand. Scrolling down through the order to pick up some of the names. Louis Menkes from NTT Pro Cycling, back in 34th at the moment. He is a rider who's been top 10 in the Tour de France on 2 occasions. He is a climbing star on his day, but perhaps today is not to be that day. A little bit further back than he might have hoped for. Wout Poels as well. We'll see how he gets on later in the week, but the man from Bahrain McLaren, 1.7 kilometres behind and back in 45th position. But it's in the early stages, as it's not that early at this moment. It's Rowan Dennis that has the lead of this bike race. 263 metres ahead of James Whelan. And as you say, Alex, it really depends on what you know, your levels of fitness at the moment and what particular physical characteristics you're bringing to a game that won't suit everyone, or a style of racing that won't suit everyone.
Absolutely. I just think we're going to see a different set of riders, and I've noticed it in. We've known about riders who are very good on a turbo from the word go. It was, you know, back in the day when we used to do ramp tests, you know, before the days of Ruvi or any of the other online platforms. Some guys would absolutely demolish the ramp tests and clock extraordinary numbers, but then put them on the road and they'd be wildly mediocre, and vice versa as well. I think Cavendish was always a classic example of someone that in a lab or on a static bike was nothing special, yet only Eddie Merckx has won more stages of the Tour de France than he has. So I think, this form of racing it's closer to cycling than FIFA is to football. But to expect to see the same guys at the top of the rankings, I think is unrealistic. And that's not to discredit anyone here, because Jimmy Whelan has put in, or Rowan has put in extraordinary figures through his bike, as is Jimmy, as is everyone in the top 10 here. These are some of your best online racers, but there's going to be some people out there who could be competitive with these guys, but wouldn't be anywhere near to them in a race, or if we were to run an actual stage with a Tour de Suisse, because they're just this is what they're good at. They're specialists at online racing, and that's fine. It's cycling is a sport with many sub sports. Cyclocross, mountain biking, BMX, cycle speedway, grass track. There's so much, and this is now another sub sport of cycling, and it's great to see.
Jimmy Whelan struggling a little bit. It is exciting to see, isn't it? It's fascinating as we start to get the hang of it and understand the sort of efforts that these riders are making, and exactly how they produce it, and what's required to get to the top of one of these standings. And it looks like Nicholas Roach is about to overhaul Jimmy Whelan. He's just about thereabouts, extremely close to him. Next man up and over the top of this climb is Chris Hamilton, closely followed by Ben O'Connor. Luke Durbridge still hanging on in the top 6 at the moment. Remco Evenepoel slipped to 7. Cam Wurf, Peter Seri, Lawson Craddock, Mickey Scher's on a bit of a flyer, isn't he? Brought his A game to this event. There's nothing like the stimulation, perhaps, of being in a TV studio. These pictures, of course, brought to you by our colleagues in SRG, Swiss Television, and they brought some of their favourites into studio just to show off what they're capable of. Remco Evenepoel, his avatar, hunches low over the bars. He puts out over 5 watts per kilo. He takes his opportunity to hydrate, and it's probably worth pointing out that it seems like a relatively short race, but the level of intensity does require rehydration. And of course, we did see Jimmy Whelan taking on a gel there as well. It seems surprising, really, that you need to take on a gel, but you're really burning incredible amounts of sugar at these levels of intensity.
Absolutely, and these guys are really going to feel this effort tomorrow. I don't know how many of them will be racing in tomorrow's stage, but if they are, they're going to be at a disadvantage to anyone that comes in fresh. I mean, let's talk for a minute about where are the gains, where are the marginal gains to be had in online racing. I think we've touched on cooling. So Mickey Shah in a studio under the lighting is going to be a distinct disadvantage to Remco, who's outside in Belgium, unless it's a 25-30 degree day in Belgium. Anyone that's got a fan is an advantage to anyone that hasn't. Anyone residing at altitude will be at a disadvantage to anyone at sea level. And then we could go into drivetrain efficiency. The power that is then coming from the bike, then going to Ruby, to the platform. Now, if the power is coming from the trainer, so from the turbo trainer, there's going to be a loss in drivetrain power compared to what's coming from the pedals. So what I'm trying to say is, when you press down in the pedal, that power that you put through then transfers from the pedal, transfers to the crank, transfers into the sprockets and the chain, that then transfers to the rear cassette, that then transfers into the turbo trainer, and there's a very small loss at every stage. So if the power output's coming from the turbo trainer, riders should really be looking at using things like wax chains and brand new chains, brand new cassettes and chain rings to make sure that drivetrain is fully optimized. Now, if the rider's power output is coming from their power meters that might be either in their pedals or in their cranks. So, for example, at Israel Startup Nation, we use 4i power meters, which is a crank-based power meter. Then you don't need a wax chain or an optimized drive chain, because the power's been recorded before it's got to the turbo trainer. So I don't know. Some riders may be using the turbo trainer, some riders may be using their own power meters. I'm not sure of specific riders' details, but it'll be interesting as this week progresses to see if riders and their teams really start looking into these gains.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? The sort of the level of detail that is required. I suppose this is a competition, and there's more than pride at stake. They've got the honour of the jersey. They've got to show those jerseys out front as best they can, and the man who's doing it to best effect currently is Rowan Dennis. He's been a change for second position, but Nicholas Roach moving up and into second position, and from Team Sunweb sitting in second ahead of James Whelan now. Early race leader Whelan has slipped back into third place. Chris Hamilton is just over 200 metres behind his fellow countrymen, in fourth at the moment, but eyeing a podium position. Then O'Connor in fifth, Luke Durbridge still hanging on in sixth, and Remco Evenepoel slipped back to seventh, but he's hanging on ahead of his fellow countrymen. And the Corning Quickstep teammate Peter Seri, Cam Wurf in ninth position, Lawson Craddock in 10th. And the man you can see on screen there, who's managing to pick out a smile despite the effort he's making, is Mickey Scher from the CCC squad, the veteran domestique on the road with the CCC squad. He's got a big old engine, a relatively big frame, and he's done fantastic work for the CCC squad, formerly of course BMC. Almost throughout his career he's been with that team in the service of the likes of Greg Van Avermaet, who's likely to make an appearance in this series a little bit later in the week. We've got some big names to conjure with throughout the week, and well, none less than Rowan Dennis, the World Time Trial champion at the moment, who's in flying form. His advantage over the second place man, 422 metres as things currently stand.
And everyone's on the climb, so that's an honest 420 metres as well, I think. I don't think that's going to... as Rowan hits the steeper slopes of this climb, that gap's going to come down a little bit, but that's a significant advantage whichever way you look at it. And I think once Rowan's crested this hill, it's predominantly downhill to the finish, and you'd think he's got this one in the bag. I'm trying to see who's really working hard here, and Rowan just looks like he's in the world of his own. Jimmy's still rocking over the bike. Matthias Frank still, his screen's frozen from before. He was obviously had a Wi-Fi dropout, which I think is equivalent of an online. Is the online equivalent of a puncher, but with no team car. He didn't make it off the start line, unfortunately. But I'm sure we'll see him later in the week. And at the moment, Rowan's just in a world of his own.
He's in a world of his own, putting out over 6 watts per kilo. It's an impressive effort, because they got the images there of Rowan Dennis, the Team Ineos rider, who just seems so in control of his effort. Jimmy Whelan seems to be able to spend a remarkable amount of time out of the saddle. It must be quite the strain on those rear dropouts of that bike. I wonder will he be using that at the road anytime soon. But it's effective stuff. It's keeping him in a podium position as things currently stand, albeit he's now slipped almost 100 metres, about 80 metres behind the second place man, Nicholas Roach, the 35-year-old Irishman, twice a Vuelta a España stage winner. Indeed, he led the race, didn't he, overall last year, and unfortunately crashed out when he looked like a decent position on general classification might have been his for the taking. Finished the season well, began the season well as well this year on the road, and somewhat frustrated in splendid isolation in Monaco. Nicholas Roach has nonetheless made the best of it, and he's running in second place at the moment. Jimmy Whelan, having slipped to third, now has to think perhaps about the danger from behind, which is Chris Hamilton, the Team Sunweb rider, sitting in fourth position. Ben O'Connor for NTT Pro Cycling is just about a further 50 metres or so behind Hamilton, and another Australian indeed. He is indeed, we've got 5 of the top 6 are Australian riders, because Luke Durbridge sitting in 6th position for Mitchelton Scott, hanging on grimly but now over a kilometre removed from Rowan Dennis. It really is a remarkable performance from Dennis. And you look at those images there of the different efforts being put in by the rider, the different physical presentation. Antonio Nibali doesn't look like he's making a huge effort at the moment. I think perhaps he's resigned to his fate. Not sure whether he's struggled physically or for fitness, or whether perhaps he's suffered one of those virtual mechanicals of electronical, if you will. But he's sitting at the back of the field at the moment, and he's not going to get back on terms at the moment. Reto Hollenstein, as we pick up the images of another rider, another local rider, another popular figure in this part of the world, who's pressing on to try and get on terms with the young Hungarian Attila Walter. Hollenstein sitting in 16th position, and a teammate indeed of yours at Israel Startup Nation, Alex.
Yes, and one of the tallest riders on our team, actually. So he's, Reto will be putting out some big numbers, and you can see it on his face that he's not taking this lightly. Just honing in on his numbers now, and always around the 400 mark. And he's only 10 meters ahead of Matteo Badalati, who's another one of my teammates, who's a much smaller. To put it in perspective, Reto's doing 380, 400 watts. Badalati between 250 and 330 for the same speed, and that's the difference that weight makes.
Well, everything counts in large amounts. The riders of slightly bigger stature, the bigger physique, of course, they've more muscle, maybe more lung capacity, but then they've got a bigger frame to carry up the hill, and it doesn't entirely equalize, does it, to watts per kilo. Usually the riders of slightly lighter frames have more of an advantage. As we're heading down the hill and still heading up the hill, I should say. Nicholas Roach, we picked up those images of the man sitting in second position. Now 868 meters behind Rowan Dennis, who, as you say, is in a world of his own. He's in a class of his own. He's absolutely flying. Rowan Dennis is now heading up the final drag towards the conclusion of this event, and there's been nothing to stop him all day. Nicholas Roach, a superb effort from him. Looked like he was stepping off the bike there momentarily, whether he's just taking a breather by stopping pedaling for a moment, or whether he's suffering from the merest hint of a Wi-Fi dropout. I'm not 100% sure. Nonetheless, it hasn't affected him in terms of hanging on to that second place, but there's no way he's going to get to Rowan Dennis. They're all putting in this massive final effort. Rowan Dennis over 6 watts per kilo. He's managed to hold that steady for this entire race. Nicholas Roach at 7.5 watts per kilo. Jimmy Whelan as well hits that ramp and really charges up this final ascent into the final 200 meters for the winner of this race. It's pretty much home and hose and sealed now for Rowan Dennis as Chris Hamilton heads into the final kilometre. But Rowan Dennis is within sight of the line now. It's been an absolutely imperious performance. He left it up to some of the lesser lights in the early stages. Jimmy Whelan took it up inside the first kilometre or so, but he was slowly but surely and steadily overhauled by Rowan Dennis. And since he got into the lead, there was absolutely nothing that anyone was going to be able to do to stop the double world time trial champion from taking the victory in the first digital Swiss 5 race. We're into Leukenbad and it's arms in the air. You might as well put them up in real sense. Rowan Dennis, well, he's not celebrating yet. I think he's celebrating the fact that that effort is complete, and complete in fine fashion. He takes victory on the day as we wait for the arrival of the second place man, Nicholas Roach, who in turn has a decent lead of 150 odd meters over Jimmy Whelan. So looks secure for Roach in second place. The podium position's not absolutely established. Chris Hamilton will attempt to get on terms with Whelan and get up for that third place. So Whelan still has a little bit of work to do. He's putting out significant watts. But into the final 150 meters for Nicholas Roach, he'll be, I think, relatively content and satisfied. Another virtual podium for him to coming after his lockdown Ronde van Vlaanderen third place finish. Nicholas Roach from Ireland and from Team Sunweb into the final 75 meters will cruise through behind Rowan Dennis and into second position on the day. So Nicholas Roach confirmed just over a minute behind, 1 minute and 9 seconds behind behind Rowan Dennis as we await the arrival of the third place rider on the day. Who's it going to be? Will it be Whelan? Should be just ahead. We see Whelan just ahead of Hamilton, who's not going to be able to get on terms. Gap between them about 55 metres. Whelan brings it home. Superb effort from the rider from EF Education first. Chris Hamilton heading to the line in fourth. And Hamilton makes it 2 Sunweb riders. And 3 Aussies in the top 4. More Aussies to come, more riders to come. Hopefully, very shortly, we'll get a reaction from Rowan Dennis. We wait with bated breath for the words of celebration from Rowan Dennis, the Australian rider from Adelaide. He's struggling like the rest of us with this lockdown situation, but he's maintained his fitness, maintained his form. Another man who's in pretty good form at the moment. Remco Evenepoel, not quite so much restriction for the Belgian rider. They're allowed outside to ride on the roads. And Evenepoel will be in shortly, just behind Luke Durbridge. Ben O'Connor in 5th place, Luke Durbridge in 6th, and Remco Evenepoel will bring it home inside the last 40 kilometres, 40 metres indeed, for 7th position on the day. Remco Evenepoel home and hosed as we wait for Peter Seri, Lawson Craddock and Cam Worf are the riders battling for the top 10 positions. Alex, it was an imperious performance by Rowan Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, you would have put him as one of the clear favourites right from the start with the nature of a solo effort. Solo effort being an effort from in Rowan's case, from his garage. But he didn't get wrapped up in the racing early on. I think in the first sort of quarter of the race he was sitting down in 5th and 6th place, but just settled into a pace that he knew he could sustain, and just absolutely demolished everyone. Even at the end, the last sort of 200 metres he could have eased up, but he just ramped it up to 7 watts per kilo just to finish. Whether that's playing mind games with everyone else, I don't know, but that was highly impressive.
Impressive indeed. I wonder what the take-homes are in terms of the tactics to be employed by the riders. Clearly, it's very similar to a time trial performance, time trial effort for the riders. Short, sharp, and intense compared to the 5 to 6 hour efforts they're used to doing in road racing scenarios. But there will be little subtle ways of playing it, as Mickey Scher, much to his great relief, finally makes it to the line, and in a fine 12th place, just behind Peo Bilbao. Rudy Moyar is the next man that we wait for the appearance of. He was in good form yesterday, the man from Groupama FDJ. Just under, 70 odd metres to get to the line for the Frenchman with the Groupama FDJ squad. Now almost, he's over 4.5 minutes down on Rowan Dennis. Nonetheless, impressive stuff from Rudy Moyar. Aurélien Paré-Pontre, his French fellow countryman from AG Tour Le Mondial, is the next man heading towards the line. And then Israel Startup Nation. Let's hear from Rowan Dennis now, the winner of the inaugural DS5 race. Well, these are the moments just as he hit the line. The virtual hands in the air. Took the win. I wonder how he feels about that. Relatively content, I would have thought. Rowan, that was an amazing effort. Hopefully we can hear from him about how it all went.
Yeah, Rowan Dennis, congratulations. You're the winner of this first race in a long time. What does that feel like?
It feels pretty good. It was more or less a 53-minute time trial, so obviously aerodynamics doesn't come into play, but the weight does, and sort of cut away. So it's good to know that what I'm doing right now, the training is really working for my time trialing in the future.
You made it look quite easy. How hard was it really?
That was not gonna lie, that was hard. I generally pull many paces, but I tell you right now, my legs were cramped in the last 10-15 minutes. I was feeling it. I just don't show it as much as some other people might. So don't get me wrong, that hurt.
And how hard is it to be stuck in the garage?
I think everyone knows that worldwide.
Thank you very much and congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, they'll let him out of the garage sometime, and there might be a little glass of beer, maybe some champagne to go with it after that fantastic effort from Rowan Dennis. The double world time trial champion is the inaugural winner of a DS5 race, the first of 5 races this week, and it's Rowan Dennis. It's plenty of them still out there, still thrashing away on the pedals to try and get to the finish line in Loikabad. Meanwhile, Rowan Dennis is just cooling down, trying to ease the lactic out of his legs, and Alex, his response was, or his comments there, pretty much mirroring your own about the aerodynamics not having an advantage and how relevant that was to him. Okay, yeah, so Alex, yeah, we'll just apologies for that. It looks like we're going to finish up on that. We've got the images of the riders. Great effort. We look forward to race 2, Frauenfeld to Frauenfeld tomorrow, over 46 kilometres. Thanks very much to Alex Dowsett for your assistance during the day. Congratulations to Rowan Dennis, Nicholas Roach and James Whelan, your podium finishers on the first of the DS5 races. We'll be back tomorrow. Please do join us for that then. But for now, it's goodbye.